I forgot I should. Are you recording?
I just started.
Perfect. Thank you. Just because regardless of you work in academia and government in the private sector, at the end of the day, research is basic. It's a basic fundamental process that we're going to be using regardless of what you do. So I'm going to be showing a couple of examples that go across different sectors to try to prove my point. And also I'm trying to bring it together to what we do in global studies. So first things first, I want you to remember the difference between methods and methodology. So global studies by itself, it's a methodology, and we're going to go in a little more in depth as to why it is methodology. And what we're going to be showing you is mostly different softwares for methods. So this part to analyze your data are going to be methods, and everything else are going to be softwares that you can use across the process of doing research. So we can do it starting from when you have ideas and you don't know how to organize them, what to do with them. Then how to start, looking for papers, looking for works that are similar to what you're trying to study. Then we're going to try to organize all your ideas through a word processor that's actually very useful for writing dissertations, but also for writing, novels even, or writing any kind of paper that you have for any class. So ZOTERO is a great manager for citations and bibliographies. You can, I'll show you a little bit more on that. And finally, I'm going to be open up to Q&A on any of the softwares that you have questions about. Based on the form that we sent at the beginning, I saw some people wanted this to be more oriented to, job search. That's not what it was advertised, and that's not, unfortunately, what we have time for. I'm very happy to join you all in private conversations as to how I got my job, how to apply for jobs out there. There's like great Instagram accounts and like social network that we can talk about that can help you with it. But I'm going to be focusing on these softwares. Also, some people wanted very detailed analysis on how to use step by step some of these softwares. Again, in an hour, it's impossible, but I'm very happy to host you over at the Orfila Center. That's where I'm usually based. I've been helping some of my classmates or my colleagues in the department learning some of these softwares and teaching them how these softwares are not only for collecting data and then managing it, but it also helps you do different types of analysis through it. So why integrating these data analysis softwares, which are ways to do methods, to global studies research, which is the methodology? So global studies has been out there just for a couple of decades. It's very recent. And as many of the interdisciplinary groups or fields of study, they're still trying to figure out a little bit more on what makes them different to everybody else. So because it is a field of study and not a disciplinary area of work, they always borrow from other disciplines. It's not to say that disciplines are obsolete or that their methods are obsolete, but rather we're trying to expand the way we research things because we do believe in transdisciplinarity. We're not even staying within social sciences anymore. My dissertation, for example, brings things from epidemiology, from medicine, from biology, from chemistry, things that would have fallen into traditionally natural sciences, but they're the fundamentals of what I'm studying, which are chemical compounds and how once they become pills or medication, they alter the way people live their sexuality. So for me to understand that, I have to be able to do social sciences because I do political economy, I do global studies, feminist studies, sexuality studies, but I also need to understand basics and foundations of chemistry for that. There's people here in the department that work on humanities and arts, and some of the examples that I'm going to give you through the softwares are excellent for doing that visual analysis, context analysis, content analysis, discourse analysis. When you're doing literary analysis, you can use a lot of these softwares in a more refined way than what we used to do in the past. And again, this is not to say that research before was not appropriate or was not sufficient or it was not as exquisite as we're trying to make it now. These softwares are just there to help us, see things that are probably harder to do manually and just to systematize them and present them in a clearer way. The second principle that makes global studies a methodology is that it's critical. The fact that it's critical is not exclusive to global studies. There are many other fields. Global studies, for example, is very inspired by critical race studies, very inspired by post-colonial studies, by indigenous studies, by Black studies, by feminist studies. So all these fields of studies try to have a more critical lens on how we know and how we learn. So compared to other fields, even within the university, you're going to see that global studies brings theories, not only from what we understand the global South, but even within those countries, what all these concepts mean. So a classic example that I give is race and racism in the United States means something completely different that it will do in Haiti, or it will do in Nigeria, or it will do in China, or it will do in Australia. So we're trying to globalize the way we know and be very critical on how we learn, because a lot of these methods and a lot of these ways of thinking actually come from the US or Europe. So we're trying to break also that down. That's why most, if not all of my examples are actually stemming from Mexico, Egypt, Latin America, or more globally speaking. We're also in global studies aiming for transnational global ways of looking at the world. This is not to just, dispose of the nation state as an idea or as a useful object of study, but what we're trying to do is to expand what it means. It's not that the nation state is the center and only actor or central actor. It just becomes a container through which transnational, global, and local processes are happening. And all of these softwares are going to show you why it's important to keep that in mind, because sometimes when we're trying to organize data that comes from the very, at atomic level, as I do with chemical compounds, all the way to international legislation, it's easier we have this kind of software than then just gives us a map and gives us a better sense on how to analyze it. Finally, it's multidimensional. If you go to economics, you'll study the economic impact of, a legislation on labor in the US. If you go to sociology, you're probably going to study labor movements. If you go to political science, you're going to look at legislation. If you go to law, you're actually going to look at the bills. If you go to feminist studies, you're going to see the impact in gender dynamics and power dynamics. So what we're trying to do is bring all of those things together, because we do believe that you take a focal point through which you have sun rays, and we have to consider that multidimensional understanding of a phenomenon. And that is why we need multiple methods and multiple theories to bring it all together. So what we do as a methodology in global studies is to be more comprehensive. So far, so good? Great. Now, how do we integrate those softwares? The first thing that I want to show you, and the first thing that I told you, is we need to understand first where our ideas are going. And I know this map is really small. I'm going to show you the actual software through which I did it. But this is MIRO, which is software, very useful. It's online, it's free, to do mappings, to do tabs, to do tables. There are other ones that I'm going to be listing there. So the ones that you see in red are softwares I'm going to be talking about through this presentation, and the ones that are in yellow are softwares that are there, but unfortunately I don't have time. Just for you to know that these are just examples, not the exhaustive list of softwares. A lot of them I don't know how to use, but I would like to learn, or I'm trying to learn. So the first thing that you need to do in research is structure how you're going to be thinking, what do you want to be put out there. So some people in the past will do, Post-its, they'll go to a whiteboard or blackboard and start writing ideas, trying to connect. So MIRO in this example gives you already templates. So all of this is already the research process. You see, we're trying to structure a research, then we're trying to find a research problem, see how we're going to write it, do lit review, the design, the research design, which is our methodology. Then we're going to choose methods, and then we're going to start analyzing. We're going to try to gather together our thoughts, put the results out there, and then we always need citations of bibliography. So through all of those stages, you can be using MIRO. If I click on it, I've worked with the government of Jalisco. Jalisco is a state back in Mexico, with the HIV program. We're trying to reform and update the program that hasn't been updated since 2015. And the commission that's in charge of managing civil society organizations, representatives from the government, scholars, and us as the consultants from an NGO I work with, they put the different stages through MIRO. So this is just the example that I just gave you, but it's actually very nice because you can just zoom in. And here again, we have MIRO. There's other ones like Figma or InfoRapid. When you're starting to do, for example, papers and you don't know how to write it down, sometimes in social sciences, we have very strict ways on how we want you to write hypotheses, for example. Papers OWL actually helps you write your hypothesis. So it forces you to write down a line or two on what are the things, what are the variables, what are the questions that you're thinking of, and then it will give you an abstract on how your thesis actually looks like. So you're writing a paper for any class, that's going to be amazing. Then we have different word processors. I usually use Google Docs just because I like everything in the cloud. And it can be connected to different citation managers. But right now I'm going to be talking about Scrivener. Scrivener costs around $40, $45, but it's absolutely worth it, particularly if you want to break down things. I have general anxiety disorder, so having huge projects gets me very anxious. And in Scrivener, I can just break down things. Then in the literature review, I'm going to be talking about these two softwares that allow you research, put a couple of words out there. You collect a couple of papers, and then it starts giving you fields and groups of people that are connected to that field. And sometimes they give you the PDFs. There are other research processors. The most famous is Google Scholar. Unfortunately, Google Scholar sometimes just falls within a US-centric type of work. Then in the research design, we have global studies. So I've been talking about global studies and all the examples that I'm going to give you are about that. In methods, I'm putting this spectrum between the qualitative and the quantitative because at least in global studies, I think because we're trying to be transdisciplinary in our methodology, we're also trying to be transdisciplinary in our methods. So all of these different forms of analyzing things are in that spectrum, not exclusively because a discourse can be turned into a quantitative project, but classically or traditionally, we see analyzing discourse as something qualitative, something mixed, or it would be case studies, because case studies we're trying to go very into depth into something, and we can get databases, we can get interviews, we can get archives. Network analysis, it's very famous now using Twitter, data mining. There are tons of softwares, web scrapping. It's very useful for that. I'm going to show you a couple. And then these are some of the softwares that you can be using. So the reason I chose NVIVO, and a similar one is Atlas TI, is because with NVIVO, you can do all of these things. The network analysis is only available for the Windows version of NVIVO, but you can actually analyze discourses because you can code them. You can do content analysis because you can also gather and put together pictures, videos, audios, and then you can just code them. You can do ethnography and write down your notes. You can write down memos. You can also code your interviews with the focus groups. I'm going to be showing examples of that. Also, you can be putting together all your bibliography from a case study, highlighting the main concepts, and then turn that into notes for your project. You can do network analysis because you can put in databases of Twitter. You can scrap Twitter and then create some networks that I'm going to show you. You can do geographic information systems, so also geolocation for Twitter and maybe for Facebook. But for that, I'm going to be briefly just showing you ARCGIS. For a lot of these things, Python has become a central software. If you like coding, if you're good with coding, I will absolutely recommend you Python because it opens you up a library of things that you could be doing for analyzing a lot of data that's out there, particularly online, that we wouldn't have access to otherwise, because doing field work sometimes is a bit hard, and a lot of communities now move online. R is an equivalent to STATA, is statistical package, but it also has some geographic display features that are very nice. Then for service, I'm going to be showing QUALTRICS, which is safer software, is available on campus. All the Google Forms, the one that you receive a form for this through Google Forms, it's also available. Both of them allow you to export things into CSV file, into an Excel file, into Google Drive. But the visualizations of QUALTRICS are way better than the ones on Google Forms, and it's safer. And then for statistics, the one that I know how to use is STATA. I know how to use SPSS. This is for sociologists love this. Demographers and public health government officials love SAS. But realistically, you should all aim to learn R because this is the future. It's an open source and it has like humongous amount of library that's coded by a community, while STATA is paid. You can get STATA here in campus as well. So unless I tell you otherwise, all of these softwares, you can get them in campus for free. So again, Scrivener is the only one. Oh, Voyant is for discourse analysis. It's very basic discourse analysis. It will show you the frequency of words. It will show you some of the themes. That's just for initial analysis. It's not very suitable, but it's out there. And then for typing down, again, I put Scrivener, Google Docs, LibreOffice. I recommend LibreOffice because then you can just translate and without having to pay for the Office system. And for citations and bibliography, I use ZOTERO because of how you can integrate it. If you check out over here, this is my ZOTERO integrated to Google Chrome. So you can actually just say directly things from internet. You can do that also with EndNotes, but I think EndNotes charges you, Mendeley as well, and RevForce is free. ZOTERO allows you to have 300 megas of data. I've been using ZOTERO since 2013, and just now I had to start paying. So that's a lot of capacity. So I will absolutely recommend it. Questions so far?
Yeah, I have a really quick question.
Yeah.
Content analysis is the same as text analysis?
No, content analysis is usually for cultural studies. So you get like vessels, you get, I don't know, like craftsmanship, and then you analyze, the colors around it, what do they mean, probably historical context around it, they use particular colors. I'm not an expert in all the, all the forms of methods out there, but I try to get around. Okay, next. So after we have figured out what's the structure of our research, then we can actually start, reviewing literature. So the first one is Research Rabbit. This is a cute video that I got from their website. I know it's not the great, it's very pixel, but it's for you to have an idea. So what it does is like a rabbit hole. You start researching something and it will show you networks of people that have written around that thing. You can structure them by author, you can structure them by dates, you can collaborate on them and be adding comments. You can then export that group of papers into ZOTERO. So you already have your bibliography done. And you can be resyncing it and syncing it all the time. So this is an example of a paper that I just chose. And then it will show you an abstract of the paper. There's an available PDF. You can just get it for free. And you can be looking at similar work. And then it will show you these networks. So everything that's in green are people that you already have. People in blue are people that are related, but you haven't added to your field of literature review. So this is great if you're just starting a project. An equivalent for that will be connected papers. Connected papers is a little more serious. I think visually it's very elegant. What it would do is it will give you a network, and depending on the year of publication, it will get darker. So the darkest are the most recent. Compared to Research Rabbit, which has an option to order everything in a timeline. On the left, you have, it will show you if you decide to put the prior work, and then on the right, you can get the derivative work, or you can just choose one of them. So here I chose the derivative work. I was looking at global studies methodologies, and then I grabbed the first paper by Eve, Theory, and Smith. So this is how Eve is connected. If you see Eve is from the latest people that has published, there's somebody from 2019. It gives you an abstract. And what I love about connected papers is that it will give you the paper. This is Semantic Scholar, which is a free library database for literary resources. It will give you Google Scholars. So it just concentrates everything, rather than just have to go one by one. And most of the time, because of UCSB, we get access to the software, to the PDFs. Because if you work from here, it will directly connect to the UCSB web, how's it called, VPN. So most of the things in Semantic Scholars are for free. And then, yeah, you can just keep going and going, and be putting together your, how do you call it? Your lead review. The difference is that compared to Research Rabbit, here you cannot, as far as I know, you cannot do collections, but it is up to you to, try to experiment with it. Both of these are free. Now, how I order my text, I use a Scrivener. Scrivener is this word processor platform that allows you to break into pieces everything, and it has multiple displays of your work. So you can be analyzing several parts of your dissertation or your paperwork at the same time. This is a project that I did for the Orfila Center. I was writing a couple of weeks ago when I went to Mexico on how there's this new attempt to do queer Latin American politics. And the two theories that I was using was one from Professor Alison Brisk here on global political will, how we speak rights to power, how we talk to politicians about the rights that we're pushing for in this agenda stemming from activism. So that will be the mainstream traditional way of doing politics. And then what I was offering is that we can turn that into a more radical way of doing, of using human rights. So that's a theory coming from Fierro. And here I have Fierro's PDF, because you can put PDFs, you can take notes, you can write down the different parts of your paper. You have different views. If you see in this first view, I have things vertically. You can write down a synthesis on the side, trying to remind you what this part of your project is about. So for example, if you have a very long text and you keep having to scroll back to, oh my God, what was my research question? You can just put it there. You can add also citations. So these are just footnotes. These are citations that go to the end. And I just have my bibliographic notes. I just type notes from different PDFs. I can have the PDF and note taking in the same screen, just split it like that. And it has different views. So the one that I'm showing you right now, it also gives you the word counts of each section. This view, it's a panel view, so I can see exactly how many sections I have here, which is communication, politics, and speaking rights power. So I know my first paragraphs are about lobbying, and then a radical way of rethinking lobbying. Then I talk about diplomatic intervention. So these are classical global studies ways of using human rights and speaking rights of power. And these and that are radical ways. So even for explaining that visually, it's easier. Yes.
So those blocks on top, you created those or?
Those blocks are just the visual
Right.
for these.
Okay.
That's this text.
That you created too.
Yeah. If you see rights lobbying against conversion
Yeah.
therapy, rights lobbying conversion therapy, rights lobbying conversion
Okay.
therapy. So it's just different views.
Okay.
So I find it useful, particularly because sometimes it's just too much text.
Yeah.
So this is just a condensed version of it. And as you can tell here, I have notes on what's the general argument. I have notes on what this section is about. And then I have my my PDF. You can actually ask Scrivener. Here it has a little thingy to send it over to a PDF editor. So you can just underline in a PDF editor and return it already underlined.
So, but those sections you created, or it creates automatically based on the file?
No, you create these
You
files.
create.
You create these files. These are just like if you have like a piece of paper,
Yeah.
and then you choose to put a second paper here and third
Mhm.
paper. And then what Scrivener will do is read all of them together.
Okay.
Then Zotero, this is how I organize my bibliography and my PDFs. I like having my PDFs in Dropbox. I don't like having books because I'm traveling all the time. So it's very easy for me to just share them. But I've come to realize that I can just underline and do everything in my Zotero. So see how many folders I have since 2013? I have like thousands and thousands of annotations. And what I love is that it does it automatically for you. You can use the little wand. And if you put the ISBN or you put the DOI, it will just do the citation for you. So you don't have to put that much effort. You can do it manually with a plus, and then you just fill it in. I have books with sections, documents, interviews, articles, reports, everything. You can put everything. It's very useful. And then just grab whatever you want to put as your bibliography and put it at the end of your paper. If you connect it to your Word, if you connect it to your Google Drive, I like using it in Google Docs because what it does is it automatically syncs. So for example, if I have two papers by the same author, so here, for example, STATA, and they're the same year, it automatically will recognize one as A and the second one as B. So you don't have to be all the time thinking of like, oh, which one was the first one or second one? It does the same with Scrivener. You can connect it with Scrivener. It takes a little bit more time and you have to work through LibreOffice, but you know, it's really not that hard. It's just a matter of just sitting and doing it. You can also work in your PDFs there. So this is, I work with the Williams, as I was telling you. One of my works is with the HIV criminalization program. So I had to do a lead review where I had to go through every single report they've done for every state they've worked with on HIV criminalization and just extract data that was specifically about the intersections of racism and HIV criminalization. So that takes time. So I just put, you know, I got all the papers in the same folder, and then I just put the little search engine, and I just look for Black, Latino, race, racism, and try to go to those different little paragraphs or lines. I just underline them, and then on the side you can just create. It will create the annotations for you, so you don't even have to write them down again. So it will put you that entire annotation in quotations and the citation. So it's beautiful. And then if you click on the citation, it will tell you exactly in the document where that citation is. So you don't have to be looking for it. You can also copy paste. So my boss asked me to also include graphics. So I just like screenshot it and you can insert in your annotations. And then I just took the annotations and brought them to Scrivener. So it was just, it's easier, I think. Now, one of the popular methods that I showed you earlier was doing surveys. So if you're doing any type of research project, really, I've done surveys for an NGO, a coalition of NGOs. We did a survey on the impact of COVID on LGBT people during 2020. Now I'm doing another survey for the Jalisco government on perceptions on diversity, equality, and inclusion in the public administration. I ran a survey for the United Nations on the access of youth to sexual and reproductive health rights services. And I just ran another survey for Ahmad, for my advisor, on how the field of security studies has changed through time for recipients of a specific scholarship between 1984 and 2004. So what I love about QUALTRICS is that the visual is, you can do a lot of different types of questions. So this is just a box question, and you can gather all of it together. And then the visualizations are way nicer. Right now, just because of time and space, I just had to give some screenshots to you. But this question was from the Jalisco government, and I was asking them, how do they feel about changes in the working environment? If they feel these changes will be good, they will be bad, or they don't care about it. So out of these are all changes that people think are good. And people seem to be okay with most of the things except hiring migrants. So this is like an immediate way for you to know like what's not going right. So for my boss, which is the director of the Sexual Diversity Commission back in Jalisco, literally from one day to the other, he's like, tomorrow I need to present advances on this to the governor because the government picked up on this and he just loved it. So I have to show why do we need to do this kind of stuff. So this specific graph, this is something that I sent him. It's like people don't want migrants in Jalisco. People don't want, I think it was women, they're not very high. The blue is trans people. So, coworkers don't want trans people or migrants. So of course it's going to be hard for them to access these kind of jobs. So it's giving them a reason to work, right? And that was just like an immediate glance. I haven't even processed this in a statistical software. This is just the survey software. Again, QUALTRICS is accessible through UCSB. Now, NVIVO, based on the voting on the voting in the survey, I'm going to be actually showing you NVIVO, but first I wanted to show you a couple of screenshots. So NVIVO is a qualitative software because it allows you to manage qualitative data. You can also analyze quantitative data, so databases, but it won't do statistics for you. That's the difference. You can still bring quantitative stuff, but it won't give you quantitative analysis. So the methods can be combined. Again, you can do discourse analysis, you can do network analysis, you can do case study, you can do ethnography and whatnot. So this is for a UN project, the one that I was telling you about on access to sexual and reproductive health services for youth through COVID. I worked with a team of 9 people from all the world. And I was in charge of the entire design of the survey and the entire design of the analysis because I was the only one who knew how to systematize information. So then later on, we were invited to a high-level commission at UNESCO in Paris, and I didn't want to go because they were not going to pay for my trip. But they particularly, like the subsecretary of UNESCO, particularly asked me to present because I was the only one who actually knew how to run this data and knew how to interpret it. So that already gives you a very high profile, and this is the UN, right? The UN people don't know how to do these things. So if you get with this kind of skills, people are going to turn around and see you. What? No. The UN doesn't pay. It's like, I mean, if you work for them, yes. But if you're doing internships or conferences or stuff, they won't pay.
So they want you to go there, present the work.
Yeah, they love my work, but they wouldn't pay for it.
Sure.
So yes. Okay, so we had people. So I asked everybody, I said the questions, and then I asked everybody in these countries to interview people under the same questionnaire. So I had people from Bangladesh, Lebanon, Mexico, Peru, Senegal, Syria, and the UK. And then I coded based on the topics that we wanted. We wanted to see what changed, what they had to adapt, what were the obstacles, what were policy requests, and what were recommendations for the future. And then sexual and reproductive health is actually a definition, and it includes 7 things. It includes abortion, it includes HIV treatment, it includes fertility, it includes sexual education, sexual health in overall. So if you see my coding later on, I'll show you, I'm going to be doing intersections of these things. So you can run all your documents or any documents that you choose. It has to be text though, and then you can get word clouds. So if you're just starting a project as well, you can do this with your lead review. Just put all your PDFs and see what are the most common words in each paper. So that already makes it easier for you to start understanding what you're reading about. So if you see sexual services, young people, health, access, so reproductive. So with this, I know that people did the interviews properly because those are words that keep coming up. And if you click in one of those words, you can actually see these trees and see what they're saying before and after. So sometimes here they speak about policy, sometimes here they speak about obstacles. So these are just ways of visualizing data and then have actual examples that you can put into your analysis. There's a sociology professor that worked with an NVIVO expert from the NVIVO software company. And they did a presentation together. And what I liked is that this sociology professor described research in 3 levels. The first one, particularly qualitative research. The first one is you have data like this, and then you have a concept, and then you grab the concept and you try to connect it to the theory that you're using. So for example, here, we were talking about services not being very popular, of sexual health. So this is connected to a concept that I'm using that's sexual health. So I have an example and I have a theory. That's the basis one on research, right? When you collect data. A second level will be trying to give connotations and denotations to that data. So once you start aggregating all of them, you can see these kind of things. You know, abortion by itself is going to appear a couple of times, but after going over and over several files, what I can understand is not only that I have an example, but that there's a pattern that abortion was the topic less taken care of during the pandemic, yet the one most demanded. So that's a second level analysis because I'm actually giving a context around a concept. Now, the third level of analysis is trying to put together variables. So that's closer to what natural scientists will do. They try to test hypotheses. So social sciences cannot predict the same way. They can try, you know, if we do statistics and econometrics and try to look for statistical significance. But if not, what we try to do is try to find relationships that could be there. You know, they can stimulate the possibilities of explaining the way we're living. So here are the 6 main topics that we wanted to ask through these surveys, through these interviews. You know, what adaptations they had to do, what challenges they face, what changes in access they saw. I can read the rest. And then these are the different topics that are included in sexual reproductive health. So where we saw the most popular topic was education. And I'm using NVIVO because it allows me to do these heat maps. So visually it's easier to then run a table and then visually see what are the topics that come up the most. Barely anybody talked about fertility, which is interesting, you know, supposing globally speaking, that there's a lot of young women, adolescents, and girls that are, you know, getting pregnant, particularly during the pandemic because of sexual and gender-based violence. However, at least from our sample, we didn't get that, right? So if this is already allowing me to you know, have a broader context, try to relate different variables, and then have a more refined analysis, because I could do this for all my PDFs, but I can only do it for Bangladesh, for people in Mexico, for Peru, Senegal, Syria, Lebanon, or UK. NVIVO also allows you to do this kind of network analysis. So if you want to do network analysis or you're trying to do more discrete analysis, work with NVIVO in the Windows version. Mac still doesn't have this. So what do? I imported databases from Twitter. So it's not enough now to just go through somebody's Twitter, scroll it, and get 100 or 200 tweets. These are 3,000, you know, and this is only from a year or 2 years, I think, of data. So that's the minimum we're talking about now for observations if you're doing this kind of analysis. So what this shows you is how recurrent a person is talking or how close that conversation is with other accounts. So this is useful, particularly when you're talking about global studies and you're trying to do more bottom-up analysis, because you can see individual people and how they relate with institutions, with other individuals, with government officials. So IPAS, I don't know if you know, IPAS is an organization for abortion and sexual reproductive health, very famous worldwide because they're specialists, they're doctors, you know, they're the ones who have a push for abortion legislation through the world. And because they're, you know, legit doctors, people trust them. So IPAS is over here, and I took the Mexico account, and they interact a lot with Central America. In Mujeres, which is the Women's Institute in Mexico. They also work with HIREL. It's a very important NGO on reproductive rights in Mexico. but they also work with UN Women, Global, UN Women Mexico, the United Nations Committee on Human Rights, the United Nations, the American State Organization. So I know this organization interacts a lot with international organizations. All of these are national government organizations. So all of these are activists, you know, and NGOs. So I just out of this map, I can already start telling you in my analysis and in a very descriptive way that this organization is very well connected and they work multi-level. They work locally, they work nationally, and they work internationally. So remember the principles of global studies, we're talking about the local and the regional. So we're going from the local level all the way to the global, and we're not seeing Mexico. We're seeing Mexico as the container because that's where they're based. But all these transnational processes are happening digitally within it. Similarly, I'm talking, I got the data from Luis Adrián Quiroz. He's a very famous LGBT activist and HIV activist in Mexico. And he talks a lot more with people. So this is a doctor. All of these are just people. But he also talks with a lot of doctors. So Dr. Chavez, Dr. Rafael Lozano, Dr. Mosqueda, Dr. Macias, where was Ricardo Baruch? So this is a doctor as well. So, you know, of course, this is having, you know, I have a little more context. I went through people's, you know, Twitter accounts. But this is telling me that this person is not a doctor, but most of his activism and relationships are with doctors. Why? Because he works in HIV. Internationally speaking, he works with UNAIDS. Opsom, it's for logistics, is from the United Nations. But he doesn't have that many other international organizations as much as IPAS does. So this is already telling you how does he interact. He does have UNAIDS here. IMSS is the national healthcare system in Mexico. Now, NVIVO can also give you geolocation. So taking the same accounts, this is helpful, particularly for me that I work Egypt and Mexico, and I'm trying to understand regional processes and regional connections on abortion pills, HIV pills, and hormones for trans people. So IPAS, again, they work with abortion. They have a lot of connection with the West, this is East Coast, right? With the East Coast, but barely that much with the West Coast. And this is just based on interactions of users based in those different spaces. And they work a lot through the Americas, particularly Central America. They don't work that much with Canada, and they don't work much globally. Ignore this, this is just a sign that if you click on it, it says global. And Adrián, funnily enough, he works a little more spread out with this part of South America, but he works a lot with Europe, you know, and for a long time, you know, like now it's trendy to say in global studies, you know, that global South just gets together with the global South and not with the global North. Well, this is the reality, you know, this is global South activists, and they engage a lot with the global North. So we cannot ignore that reality, you know, just because of where the organizations are based, where a lot of these decisions are taken. So rather than just ignoring them, we can accept that Adrián has a national presence, and you know, he's very famous for that. But he also knows where the decisions were done. He worked with somebody in Kenya just because one of the UNAIDS conferences was there a couple of years ago.
I have a question. How do you, when say geolocation is like, that's his networks, right?
Yeah.
So people who are in those locations are in touch with him. Can you assess like how often or what kind of interactions they have?
Yes, because if you look at, I'm going to show in vivo now. Oh, I have to open another.
Oh, don't worry. It's okay. Don't want to start.
It doesn't take much, don't worry. I cannot do it in my Mac because Mac still doesn't have that feature. But if you go through, this is a database from Twitter that you just get a plugin in Google Chrome or in Firefox, and it will do it for you. It's amazing. So I coded here cases. I coded automatically this database because you can also get automatic coding, so you don't think too much. Here. So I went through Adrián. So I went through all his tweets. So for example, if I find somebody that was in Kenya, and let's say that person in Kenya was this person, then I can just see all the tweets Adrián has done with that person.
Okay, so that's the mentions or like the interaction. Can you, kind of interaction?
It's mentions or retweets, and it will show you. If you go to the database, let me move myself. Here you have the mentions.
Okay.
Here you have hashtags. Here you have retweets.
Right.
Uh,
So it shows me
and here's the actual tweet.
okay, what kind of interaction, and I can select by each interaction if I want, right?
Yes, you can choose each interaction, and then you can choose by each user.
Right.
Doing it interaction by interaction is a little bit exhausting, but if you want to look tweet after tweet, I recommend doing this auto coding, and then I just go through Luis's tweets, which are here. This is his Twitter account.
Okay.
So I can just ignore everything else and just look at his tweets for the last 2 years, I think. There's like 3,000 tweets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here's the word cloud that I was showing you. If you click on a word, you can see the files in which that word appears. You can see the word tree for the file, for the word, sorry. And again, this is a bit more clear. This was the initial document that I showed you. So if you choose one of the codes, you can see how it was coded. This is how the references, once you coded things, then you could choose to show only the data that was coded that way. You can choose to do these matrices that I was telling you about, and then you can choose to show you the intersection between adapting activities and sexuality education. And here are the specific things. So when I had to do the report, I could give these citations. Any questions? We have 5 minutes. Yeah.
How long did it take you to like become fluent in NVIVO?
I mean, I think I'm good with softwares. I'm still not fully fluent and I'm still learning things, but I was able to get the basics in a month. It's pretty intuitive and there's tons of tutorials. So you can actually download sample databases, work through them to just get the gist of it. And then it's a matter of you practicing on your own projects or forcing people to do projects this way. So for example, I started using it because I ran that survey for that NGO on the impact of COVID on LGBT people. And QUALTRICS allows you to do quantitative stuff that you just check a box or choose an option, and then you can do open-ended questions. So I downloaded the open-ended questions, and then I analyzed these with NVIVO. So I forced myself to make it useful, because unless you practice and see the utility, it's really hard to understand how it can be useful. So that's why I'm giving you very particular examples. And what else? And at the end of the day, if you're strong with it, I'm happy to help. I'm around. I'm going to be in UCLA starting in July, but it's not that far and we can always connect online. Here in campus, we have it's called the Collaborate. It's in the second floor. In the library, you have the ocean side and the mountain side. In the mountain side, the second floor, you have the collaborative lab or something, and they have these softwares as well. Renata is the person in charge of a project called Carpentry. So she teaches you basics on Python, on web scrapping, on, I don't know if they do NVIVO. She's the one who told me like, hey, there's NVIVO. She's not an expert on it, but she knows a lot of these softwares. It's called Interdisciplinary Research Collaboratory. It's room 2322. And it's open from Sunday to Thursday from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. and Friday and Saturday from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Was that in the library? Or?
Library, second floor, mountainside. Now, how to organize and analyze quantitative data. I use STATA just because of how popular it still is currently among senior scholars. The reality is that younger generations are getting more used to R because it complements statistics with broader coding. And if you learn R, it's easier to transit to Python and to like WebEx and through HTML and any other coding system, because all the coding systems are just languages where you have to explain the computer what you want to do. So here I do have coding, but it's still very unique to STATA and to SPSS, which was the previous version in SAS. But what R and Python allows you to do is that the actual syntaxis of things is very close. So it's like learning French and Spanish and Portuguese. You know, they're very close. They're close enough. So it's easier just to change a couple of letters and a couple of pronunciations. Between STATA and R, it's not that hard, but it will be learning, I don't know, what would be an equivalent? I don't want to say between Spanish and English, but probably between Spanish and Catalan, I guess, because this is something that we're not used to in Latin America. But anyway, what you can do with STATA is actually do statistical analysis. So whenever you're doing research, do not feel obliged to do analysis that proves the hypotheses. We don't really run experiments very often in social sciences. So what we mostly do is descriptive statistics. So if you have databases, I strongly recommend doing using STATA. I do like the visuals. A lot of people don't like the visuals, but I do like those kind of tables. And it forces you to order your data in particular ways that then just when you're trying to explain makes it easier. So right now, this is part of the project that I was telling you for these NGOs that are working on COVID and LGBT people. And this question is asking different people, who do they live with during the pandemic? So this is gathering together different answers. So there were 615 answers, but they came actually from 386 people. And most of the people live with their mothers, and these queer people, and then their fathers, and then other family members. So probably brothers, sisters, or siblings. So visually speaking, it allows you to do very quick stuff. But yeah, if you can learn R, go for R. If not, go STATA. STATA is available in campus as well. You can get an annual subscription. Finally, this is ARCGIS. R allows you to do maps. Python usually allows you to do maps, but it requires other type of coding. I use ArcGIS because it's free in campus. And this is the software that I'm the weakest in, but I can do very basic stuff. So I work with another NGO on women's reproductive rights, and we were trying to see how could we, how could we push to establish something called Posadas AME, which are just shelters for women coming from rural areas, trying to get to major cities. This project was designed to be applied in the peninsula, the Yucatan Peninsula. And what we're trying to say is like, rural people get pregnant and they cannot always get to the hospital on time because there's not enough connections. It takes too long. So what we need to do is shelters in the middle of the way or close to the hospital so they can come there a week before, 2 weeks in advance, and they just stay there and then get to the hospital. Because if not, the mortality rate for women actually rises. So if you see the colors in the different states that I got through this map that I did, it will show you the states that have, if it's clear, the least amount of shelters, and if it's darker, the most amount of shelters. So this part of the country is usually considered the poor South. We have higher, families have more children, higher rates of poverty, higher rates of illiteracy, less access to hospitals, less bigger cities. And these will show you the mortality rate of women. So what I'm showing is, okay, where you have darker states, you should, where you have bigger circles, you should have more shelters. Ideally, because if you have a lot of women dying because they cannot give birth in proper conditions, you should make more shelters so they get closer. So we saw that happen in this state and in this state. But for example, we see very high mortality rate for women here and very few shelters. Here as well, there's very few shelters, very high mortality rates. So this was just an initial. We didn't end up using this map, but initially it allowed for the organization to justify the project and get funding from the Kellogg's Foundation. And they got like shit tons of money. So something as basic as that is allowing you already to show the importance of a project, the importance of a phenomenon, the importance of studying something. And you can do this globally. You can do other storylines that I don't do because I don't know how to do ArcGIS that much. But again, you can get it in campus. And that's all on my side. So if you have any questions, I'm very happy to help. And remember, these are just softwares to help you out. These are not all of the softwares. I hope the examples are useful. And yeah, I'm open up to anything you want to know. People in the audience, are you there? Yay.
Are you gonna, to those who attended, distribute the slides?
There, it's recorded, right? So we're gonna be posting the recording. If that helps.